Hello there and welcome to my video where I make mini floater frames and paintings for Nucleus Portland's Microdose 2 show. The theme of the show was small art. Artists were required to create original pieces between 1/2 inch to 2.5 inches in size, and that artwork needed to be ready to hang at the gallery. I normally paint on larger unframed wood panels, but I wanted to try something different for this unusual size. I love the simple look of floater frames, so I decided to try and make some small ones myself. The distinguishing characteristic of a floater frame is a small gap between the artwork and the frame molding. Now, before I show you my process, I just want to note that I didn't really know what I was doing when I began this project. I just had this idea and I wasn't sure if I could make it work, so there was a lot of experimentation and watching videos and just me trying to get a feel for how this would go. So I want to let you know that there may be different ways to go about this, and my method wasn't very precise. However, the end result was something that was beyond my expectations. So here's the basic construction of my pieces. There were 3 sections that needed to be prepped before they were permanently bound together. The first component was this solid wood backing that the other sections laid upon. The second was the outer frame, which was comprised of 4 wood strips glued at the corners. The third piece was the wood panel I would paint on. The outer frame and the wood panel were to be bonded to the backing to create one full piece. Here are the supplies I used for the frames. I purchased 3 sizes of wood at my local craft store. These larger flat birch pieces I used for the painting panel as well as the solid backing. These basswood strips were used for the frame, and these very thin strips were used to create equal gaps between the frame and the artwork panel while I built everything out. I used some fine grit sandpaper. I also used some wood glue. We had this glue in our toolbox for some home improvement and it worked so well. I was skeptical, so I did a test to see how strong the hold would be, and it was surprisingly strong. I used this small razor saw as well as this table miter box for my cuts. I don't think I could have done this project without this miter box and its 45-degree angle guides. It made everything so much easier. I used some regular office supply rubber bands to help hold my glued frames in place while they dried. Since I don't have tiny band clamps in my studio, these worked out really well. I also used some regular office supply staples as frame hooks on the back. And now for my painting supplies. I sealed the wood for the painting with GAC 100 and then clear gesso. For the actual painting, I used Liquitex Acrylic. And for the brushes, I used my Trekell Mab Graves mini collection. These were a delight to use and very relevant to this small theme. I also used a size 1 protégé brush for my line work. To begin the process, I cut my little panels to size. They were 2-inch squares in which I sanded down the corners for a rounded edge. Next, I began eyeballing the cuts for my frames. Like I said, not a precise method. I cut a few pieces using the 45-degree angle guide on my miter, and then I used thin spacers as guides so I can figure out how much I'd need to cut and adjust. Once I thought I got something even and everything lined up nicely, I lightly sanded down the rough edges. I then glued my frame corners using a skewer from my kitchen. And once the glue was applied to all 4 corners, I used a rubber band to hold it all into place until it dried. This was my favorite part of the process because it was when I realized this could actually work. After the outer portions of the frames were dried, I removed them from my drawing/spacing contraption so I could start prep for my painting surfaces. I prepped the small wood panels for painting by lightly sanding and then brushing excess dust off the surface. Next, I applied a layer of GAC 100 to seal and protect the wood, and then a couple of thinned layers of clear gesso. I sadly didn't film the part after the surface prep, but in summary, I glued everything to my solid backings to get these. I then taped off the frame edges to keep them clean while I painted. I then transferred my painting mock-ups to the wood panel by using a pressure method, where I coat one side of my mock-up with pastel and then trace over the other side so it transfers the line work to my surface. I then solidified my guidelines with some graphite. And now finally, time for the painting. I worked on these little paintings simultaneously, so while one was drying, I'd be working on the other. Now for that satisfying tape peel. I was so happy with how these turned out. I varnished my paintings with Liquitex gloss varnish, and then I also coated the frame itself with a clear semi-gloss polyurethane. And now for the hanging process. Since these pieces were so small and light, a regular office staple worked out great as a hook. I also glued some of my spacer strips on the back so the painting would hang flush to the wall and not in a downward angle. Here are the final results. Once again, I am super happy with how this experiment went, and I may do these again in the future. Thank you for hanging out and watching this fairly long video. Stay tuned for more in the new year.